Welcome, everybody. This is Tesla Today. It's Monday, and we have a very special treat. We have Jeff Lutz with us, and he's going to teach us something that many people in the Tesla community has been asking about. We've got the earnings call coming up in Wednesday, and one of the big topics people are trying to understand is the margins. As when the Tesla price cuts in January, February, March, and most recently, how's that going to impact the margins? Well, Jeff is going to explain to us what happened to prices over the years, what happened to cost of goods, what possibly could surprise us with supply chain costs, transportation costs, and others. And so we're very fortunate because Jeff is an expert in this area. He's currently even consulting with the large top 50 companies. He has himself been an executive running supply chain and manufacturing and brands and so forth. So thank you, Jeff. Come on over and take it away.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, just again, some quick background on me, like why would you even listen to this? So I did spend a couple of decades in supply chain leadership at Fortune 10 to 50 type companies, and I also right now I'm consulting with a few mega cap companies right now, leading my own consulting firm, and definitely learned a lot over the last couple of decades. And what we hear, I'm external to Tesla, just like everyone else. And when I hear things and I hear them say things, whether it's in investor days or earnings calls or tweets or whatever, or any of their written communication, some of these things mean a different thing to me. And I'm hoping that through this presentation, I can help interpret that and be helpful to the rest of the community. So Herbert, why don't we just dive right into it?
Okay, sounds good. This is a nice deck that you prepared. The topic is cost advantage. So you're going to teach us all the things that Tesla might be doing that's giving it a cost advantage of how they're actually reducing the cost. We really do hope that there's going to be a surprise on margins on Wednesday.
Yeah, if we stay on this for a minute. So so there's a lot of people in the Tesla community that make EPS models. There are people in the community that model unit shipments, deliveries, production. I'm not doing that in this presentation. What I'm doing is I'm extracting information that's publicly available, and what I'm doing is I'm providing some oversight of an approach that maybe isn't publicly available, which is kind of my background in supply chain and what some of these what that could mean in some of these numbers that we're about to see. I'm not going to predict EPS. I'm not predicting gross margins, but I certainly can walk you through what I believe the trends are going to be based on my experience.
Okay.
So with that,
let's go through the outline.
A brief just thing on the outline is just kind of just baselining where was like if I were launching these products and I've been building them for 20 quarters, one of the things I would look at is the launch cost versus kind of where we think we could be today. Just a quick background of like what's in COGS. Like you hear the word COGS all the time, cost of goods sold, but many people don't even know what's inside of that. People think it's, the engineers, in Palo Alto are in COGS. They're actually not in COGS. So we'll talk through like what's in some of these things. What are the definition? What has Tesla told us about COGS? What is this term COVID economies? What are the COVID implications? I do a lot of consulting work in this space in terms of how to deal with, like where do these cost spikes come from? Are they still there? How are they dealt with? So I'll kind of walk through it at a very high level. What are the recession implications? Now, technically, are we in or out of recession? Nobody knows, but I'll kind of talk through a little bit of history in the auto market, and there's also history in other markets as well, and what it could mean for Tesla now. And then I have a punch list, and I'm continuing to add to like what are Tesla's advantages over other OEMs. It's a pretty lengthy list, and it's probably different than some of the stuff you've heard before. So I look forward to going through that. So with that said, I know some of these things have to be split up to make it easier on the eyes. So thank you, Herbert, for thinking through that. So I wanted to, there's numbers on a slide and there's pictures, and I want to talk through like each of these and what they mean. So what this graph is first off, we could have put Model S and X in here. It's lower volume. And by the way, the pricing pre-COVID on an S and X was lower than it is today. We actually got down to 69 to, if you remember, 69K on the Model S entry a few years ago, and then it went up with COVID. But let's put that to the side. Let's focus on the 3 and Y. And a couple of takeaways I want to be important. Number one is let me silence my my alerts. So in terms of MSRP, there's inflation and there's deflation. If the deflation is positive, that means the price has actually gone down. And if you see the deflation is negative, that means the pricing today is actually higher. So let me cancel my alerts 1 second. So on the highest price or the highest volume vehicle, the Model Y, you actually see that if you look at the pricing. So why did I focus on the launch quarter? Because, and you've even heard Elon gave example of this yesterday in a space. Someone asked, like, what's the cost of the rocket, of the Starship rocket that's about to launch? He says that's not the right question. The question is when it's actually in volume production. And volume production, that's a vague term. So what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to take 2017 gross margins from Model 3 because it was just building a couple hundred a week through a couple thousand. So I picked 2018, middle of the year. And then for Model Y, I picked 2020, which was a couple of quarters in the launch, but not the launch quarter at the lowest volume. So what are the couple of takeaways here? One is the highest volume vehicle that Tesla builds is the Y long range. And the MSRPs are actually higher from when they were at launch about 3 years ago. So there's a lot of talk about, oh my God, Tesla keeps cutting prices. But if you actually look, and then the sources, I mean, I picked a number of different sources. I used Car and Driver, I used Electrek, I used a number of different sources just to like pull, snapshots or physical pictures of Tesla pricing at, given the date of the article, to pull these numbers. And I correlate these back to a couple of other charts that I've seen. But the point is the Y is basically balanced. The long range one is the MSRPs are higher, and then the performance is slightly lower, but the volumes are obviously, a fraction on the performance that they are the long range. And then the standard version, which just went on the configurator, didn't exist at launch. But you can see it's positioned a few thousand lower than when the it's positioned where the Y long range actually launched. So again, a lot of discussion about this was just to set a little bit of a baseline on like what's happened with MSRPs. People hear like 20% declines in Y. Well, if you look at the production, the launch quarter of a product, and those first couple of quarters, that is when the COGS of that product are at its highest ever. That's when you've got the most inefficiencies, you've got the lowest production rate, you've got the lowest yields, both in the Tesla factories and at the supplier factories. So that's a very important point. And what I did is I went into the Tesla, their earnings reports, and I just pulled the auto gross margins, X ZEV credits, and stock-based compensation from those reports. So when Tesla was in that launch quarter of the 3, they were at 21% gross margins. And then when they were at the launch quarter of the Y, they were at 23.7. Again, this is when these vehicles, which were the highest volume vehicles of their time at launch, and now the Y is the highest volume, this is where the gross margins of the company, this is what they were reporting. And I would say in the first couple of months of production, especially on the 3, gross margins on the 3 itself were definitely negative, highly negative. And they probably just broke even in the first half of 2018 is what I would imagine. I think Tesla actually commented in an earnings report that the Y has now become profitable. I believe it was in 2018. So again, wanted to baseline you on the MSRPs at launch and what Tesla's gross margins were at the auto level at launch, where the MSRPs are today, and the fact that Tesla's efficiencies and cost structure at launch are at their worst in their product's lifetime or history. that's, in terms of, I just want to make a couple of those points. And these are just the screenshots. You have to, blow them up a little bit, but there was the Electrek article from July of 2020. It's actually when I picked up my first Model Y, and the regular version was $49,900 and the performance version was $59,900. That's the takeaway from that one. And then, I picked current pricing. This is all US based. I picked current pricing just by going on the website. This is just another image of the same thing. I guess it doesn't blow up well on this, but it's $49,900 and $59,900 for the standard, and then for the long range and the performance Y. So these are just screenshots that are supporting some of the data in the table. Again, in the key takeaways, so Model Y is about 3-to-1. If you look at Q2, what's predicted, it's approaching 3 Model Ys for every one other car that Tesla produces. So the story is really Model Y is the point, and MSRPs are flat to up since that launch quarter. And then Tesla told us on Investor Day what they've done with COGS of Model 3. Again, X commodities, and I want to explain what that means. There's a little asterisk at the bottom of that slide that some people have caught on to. And I want to explain that in a later slide. I'm going to go into a lot of detail on that.
Wonderful. Okay, good setup. So it's the same auto gross margins above 20%. Right? At the time when it should have just launched, it should be the worst it could possibly be at that time. The factories weren't yet even more improved. And then the prices are basically flat at this point. So very interesting. This is pre-COVID. So because of COVID and other things, prices went up. And then now that COVID's gone, you're going to say that's why prices go down. We'll see, right?
Yeah. And an interesting voiceover, and I'll get to it when I get to factory efficiencies. Let's go to the next one about just during COVID. All right. This is a little bit of a reader. I don't normally do slides like this, by the way, but I think it's important. I think we've broken a couple things out too, but I am going to step through this because it's really important, because Tesla showed this slide, and I want to break it down, like what it means, as a supply chain manager, a professional, like what did I see? What did I hear? So what they said is from 2018 to now, there's been a 30% reduction in COGS, and they defined what they included in COGS, and that's the graph. But what they included in COGS were their quote unquote manufacturing costs. If you go back to the previous one, if you could, Herbert, it was manufacturing costs, inbound, outbound logistics, and warranty, and then material. Material is inbound from suppliers. So that's just one piece. What it doesn't include are commodity prices. Like what they basically did is they normalized the 30% based on the commodity pricing they were getting in 2018, because there's been all these different fluctuations. And what's happened actually in the last couple of months, our commodities are rolling over. They've been actually rolling over for the last 6 months, but there's been these intermediate spikes. But the commodity portion of pricing, so the raw materials that go into Tesla suppliers, some of the materials that come into Tesla directly for the parts that Tesla makes, like aluminum, like steel, like copper, like lithium carbonate, into their battery manufacturers, those have rolled over significantly. So I wanted to explain. So that 30% is basically Tesla working on the bill of material, like the parts. Think of like the bucket of parts that make a Model 3, and then Tesla working on their warranty claims, Tesla working on their manufacturing costs in their four walls, like the how do you convert that bucket of parts to a finished goods. So if we go back to the, I'll break down what each one of these means.
Yeah, but Jeff, let me ask this question. Why did they only show us the 30% reduction for the Model 3? Why just the Model 3? Why didn't they show us the Model Y?
Yeah, they could have extrapolated. They could have done the Model Y. It would have been a different number because it started later. But what I like what they did with the 3 is, again, if they picked the launch cost of 3, the launch cost of 3 back in 2017 would have been much, much higher. They picked 2018 because that's when it got into more, meaningful production volumes, going from 5 to 10K per week. But they could have done this slide for Model Y. There's no reason they could have. And I'm going to extrapolate what I believe has happened with the Model
There you
Y
go.
in
There
the
you
next
go.
couple of comments.
Okay. So where do you want to go next?
If we go back to the slide that has all the words, because I want to actually go through each definition of those boxes. So those
People
boxes
can't
in the
read
lower
these things
left.
though, buddy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just go, we'll zoom in and we'll go through it. So volume growth. So one of the points I want to make is over 20 quarters of production of the Model 3, they've driven 30% COGS deflation. So basically some number between 1% and 2%. It's nonlinear. It goes down over time. But in general, that made sense to me when I saw the 20 quarters of production and 30% COGS deflation. Anywhere between 1% and 2% should be what you should be able to do. Now, we've had a bunch of obviously odd things happen in the economy, but that's what you should be able to drive. And I want to go through like how they do that. So the volume growth, pretty explainable, but it's that weekly run rate at Tesla factories and at suppliers. So when the volume goes up in the factories, what happens is you're actually utilization of equipment and labor is the top cost driver in a factory. Labor and equipment utilization. So if you can basically take all the installed capacity and all the people that you have trained up and nobody's sitting around and everyone's working, that's when you get your peak cost structure in terms of like improved cost structure. As soon as you start idling people and idling equipment is when your cost structures can really erode very quickly. So I want to really park that comment. It's really important. The next thing is it's to me, it's readable. But maybe I've got a different view than others.
Too many words, buddy. We got
Yeah,
to stick
no, I
to the
know.
slides.
Yeah. In productivity, I want to read through. It's really important. It's the rate per station. This is where Tesla goes like the best process. It's that yield and rate per station and total rolled yield. And that has done nothing but improve quarter on quarter. Overhead efficiency. This is as those volumes grow and those launched and fixed capital cost depreciate. So think about electricity, water, gas, like that whole building's there. That whole building's got to, it's got to get water, it's got to get gas, so forth. But now you're dividing into a much larger unit number, so all those costs come down. All the product improvements and engineering changes, I combine them together, even manufacturing changes. Tesla does this better than anyone. Most companies group these changes and do them like 2 or 3 months after launch, and then they don't really do them much again. If they do, they maybe look at them once a quarter, maybe once every 6 months, they'll roll in a series of changes. Tesla just rolls them in every week as they become available. And that basically that drives a much higher velocity of change and cost reductions just faster in the process. This localization thing is big. So think about the end customer and where they go pick up their car, and then the distance to the factory, and then reducing that. Lost a Y there. The delivery wave. So first off, the nodal analysis of where the car is built and where the person's picking it up. That distance, the number of nodes and interchanges, interactions, and then the cost per carrier or the cost per box in terms of like what's carrying that vehicle. That, and I'll go through that in a bit in terms of what happened during COVID. Some of those costs went up 10 to 100x during those times. So by Tesla moving their factories closer to where their people actually pick up their cars, their cost structure is going to come way down. And then that delivery wave was 70% of the cars in Q2 last year were delivered in the final month. And Tesla's been taking that down to 60, 50, 40. And if they can get that down to 30, call it 35 to 40% in the final month, most companies have a larger wave in the final month. That's just how it happens. But when you get over 50%, you all those inefficiencies kick in. You ask your carriers for overtime, you run overtime, you ask for expedites for inbound material to your suppliers, you ask for expedites out of your factory. So if you can take that wave down and make it more normal scheduled operation, all of those excess costs go away. And that's obviously that's a huge deal. And then the supplier scale piece, this is what Tesla spoke about. Again, I know this reads a little bit like a book, and I could have broken up into 10 different slides, but I ran out of a bit of time. I just want to make sure I get the comments out. So for suppliers, every quarter they're seeing increased volume and dependable scale from Tesla, meaning when Tesla says I need this many in a quarter, Tesla goes and buys that material. And then when the end of the quarter comes, you don't see Tesla pushing material out. That's why we've seen this DOI number creep up a bit, but it's not at some inflection point. It's not at any local maximum. It's not actually, to me, it's not at a danger point. It's nowhere near a danger point. I think if you get over 20, that's when we would be a little bit more concerned about DOI, but we're nowhere near that. So basically Tesla takes all the material they ask for, and then they keep running production. They run production on December 30th and 31st, like they run it on, January 1st the next year. And that's a big deal for suppliers. That means suppliers aren't going to be second guessing what you're ordering, and they're not going to, also that's a big deal for supply continuity as well. So if we go to the next, I wanted to explain where these cost reductions are coming from, maybe open it up for questions, Herbert, from you.
Sure. Let me ask you this though. Okay. So they did this for Model Y. Of all of these cost reductions buckets, do they also apply to Model Y? And
yes.
What would your guess? Are you going to tell me later what your guess is if the reduction is 30% in cost of goods sold for Model 3? What is your guess of what it will be? Because Model Y is the most important one for us. That's the one that's going to move the needle or not.
Yeah. No, and I can give some oversight on that. I mean, it's going to be it's going to be lower than Model 3. Number one, it's been in production shorter. Number two, it's starting from the Model 3 baseline that was in production for a couple of years. So they took a lot of the improvements from Model Y when they rolled this into production late 2019, early 2020. They had a couple of years of Model 3 improvements to include. So it's probably smaller, but go back to that 1% to 2% per quarter deflation. I feel pretty good about that. Again, some of those are going to be inflationary, like during 2021. But then now I think we're experiencing significant deflation, specifically in the latter half of 2022 and the beginning part of 2023. Why am I saying that? Two reasons. One is the commodity decline. The second thing is are the Austin and Berlin factories filling up. Those two things are going to help put that, that's why Tesla was raising prices, quite frankly. Their input costs were going up on commodities, and they had these two factories that were starting from zero, and where they had to load people and they had to load capital in it, and basically almost nothing was coming out. And that's why when Elon referred to those factories as furnaces, that's exactly what they were at those times. But by the latter half, look at the latter half of 2022, and what you've seen these factories do now is they're basically doubling their production size in about 4 to 6 months. So they're on that path right now. So if I were to predict that Model Y, that 30% number for Model Y, I mean, it could be easily in the 20% area,
but still a reduction. And then, and it might be a really dumb question, but you're going to teach me about cost of goods sold. But if they're saying that the Model 3 cost of goods sold went down from 2018 to currently today by 30%, does that mean that their margins, if they can reduce the sales price by 30% and then maintain the same margins, or is there something accounting wise that's different?
Well, can you just go through the question again? Sorry.
If you just told me that if the price remained the same, okay, if the cost of goods sold reduced by 30%, does that mean if you want to maintain the same margin that you had back then, you could actually reduce the average sales price by 30% and then continue the same margin? Or the margin and cost of goods sold, how do they relate to each other?
There are a couple of other factors, like there's the cost to actual sell in. So there's actually cost lines between MSRP and ASP, which is basically the cost for Tesla to sell their products. But yeah, no, you can do a pretty decent relationship between gross margin and MSRP for sure. So I mean,
Really?
here's what I believe. I believe that the Model 3 was basically break even when I showed you that data point, maybe slightly positive in early 2018. Okay, I believe the Model 3 was basically break even. So if they sold a car for 40K, it was around, average COGS of around 40K to build. So if they've taken that down by 30%, again, they said X commodities, but now we believe those commodities are rolling back. And we'd have to do a commodity by commodity analysis to see if they've all rolled back. But basically, you could see 12 to 15K coming out of the price of a Model 3 to build it.
Okay. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. I've got some questions coming in, but let's go ahead and continue because I think you need to first explain a little bit more before you can answer questions, right? But it's up to you.
Yep. Yeah. No, I can. Yeah, I can take a couple. Let me explain COGS, and we can maybe stop and go through a couple of questions.
Okay.
So you hear a couple of terms. You hear unit economics and you hear COGS. I want to just explain unit economics, and there's pictorial things you can look at online as well. But basically, in unit economics, it's every line from MSRP all the way down to gross margin. So what are in line? So in the MSRP is like, obviously everybody knows what MSRP is, but below MSRP is the average selling price. So between the average selling price and MSRP, those are Tesla's costs to sell vehicles. So think about people in the delivery centers and any communications about sales. Those could be between ASP and MSRP, or any delivery spiffs that Tesla does. Tesla does this a lot in China. They give delivery incentives for people to take cars in the last week. They sell insurance. They do a number of different things where they discount. So any discounts would appear between MSRP and ASP. And then, so you're basically accounting for selling costs. And then inside, the big thing are the bill of material BOM, bill of material cost of goods sold, and then the non-bill of material cost of goods sold. And then basically from there, you get your gross margins. And then this is X OpEx. So this does not include the autopilot team, or the engineering team, designing the body mechanics on Tesla. So that's what's in unit economics. It's the gross margin per car built. Again, X without the OpEx of the company. Mm-hmm. And then COGS. So in cost of goods sold, there's basically two big chunks. There's the bucket of material. So think about the doors, think about the hood, think about the Tesla logo on the steering wheel, think about the steering wheel assembly. So it's just all of the screws, all the components, tens of thousands of components to make a car. That's in the bill of material. Then the non-bill of materials, where you take all of those components and then you convert them to something that is landed at the actual consumer. So that's in non-BOM. So I give some BOM examples. The non-BOM examples, I think, is what is not as widely known to people. So the biggest cost in non-BOM is probably going to be, it's called value add or conversion. Tesla calls it manufacturing cost. So that's the cost to assemble and test the car in the Gigafactory. That's the labor involved in doing that. That's the scrap involved in doing that. And there's something called common equipment depreciation that's involved in that. Then there's warranty. So this is when something's wrong with your car, you have to go get it serviced. Those costs, both the material costs and the labor costs, are inside of warranty or any kind of recalls. So there's CapEx. There's the CapEx in the Gigafactories, and then there's the CapEx that Tesla buys at their suppliers. So when Tesla tells the supplier, it says, "Hey, I want this spring, and I want it at 3 million units annualized." There's two modes of operation. They'll either fund that CapEx with the supplier, or they'll include it in the piece part of the cost. So that's included in the non-BOM costs. And then call center, new. Yeah, and then the call center's in there as well.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, we got a bunch of questions. Should we go there first, or
sure?
What's your thoughts? Okay.
Sure.
So I think two of the questions are very similar. So Stephen asked the question: the biggest unknown is when will the commodities deflation roll back into the cost of goods sold? That high auto margins can rise to the back half of the year. And Paulo asked something similar, I think, which is with all the commodity price reductions in the last 6 months, is Q1 23 the first time we'll truly see the impact, or is it going to be later? Yeah.
Yeah. So here, so Elon started talking about this on the, I believe the Q3 earnings call in October. And he said, we're already seeing significant decline. He actually called it deflationary. And somebody asked him, and we've been in that meeting or another call, said, hey, how long does that take? And he says, oh, that could take up to 6 months. Well, that is for the earliest part to get into an assembled car. So think about the silicon that's on the autopilot board for the autopilot computer. That could have a 20-week lead time. But Tesla's got, what they'll do is they'll subsection their bill of material in terms of lead times. And I would have to guess that most of their cost structure of their car is not in that very long lead time category. And so long story short, some parts could happen within a quarter in terms of seeing it in the bottom line. Some may take 2 quarters, but that's pretty much the conversion rate of when these commodities roll over to when you see it in end vehicles. Somewhere between 1 and 2 quarters. There's not one answer.
But Jeff, I thought you told me earlier that it's quite common for companies like, and specifically Tesla, that will actually lock it down and they'll do long-term contracts. Long-term. So couldn't they have already locked it down in 2018 for 3 years or longer? Or
some things, and depends how those contracts are written. Most companies don't lock themselves into the ability to not renegotiate lower pricing when those opportunities occur. So it really depends on how the contracts are negotiated. And not everything is bought on a long-term contract. I want to be clear with that. Every supplier is going to have 2 things. One is they're going to have a master services agreement with Tesla. That's like, this is how we do business generically, both from a quality, indemnification, so forth, everything, pricing. But that specific pricing for that part and the specific PO terms will be negotiated on a project by project basis. And then they'll also be renegotiated quarterly. I mean, I would imagine that Tesla is going to their supply base almost quarterly, in some cases, asking for reductions based on Tesla's performance.
It could show up then. Commodity prices could show up in this quarter, 2 days from now.
Sure. Some. Good. Okay. Absolutely.
I mean, Raymond's going to go right for it, man. He's going to just ask the question. Earnings call coming in Wednesday. Wall Street gross margin, 23%. Do you think that's a reasonable target?
Yeah, I'm not going to get in the mega packs right now. His question was on overall gross margin or on auto. So what I think... Yeah. So again, I'm not modeling. There's 12 other people in the Tesla community that model gross margins. They're talented, go have a look at what they're doing. But what I will tell you this quarter will probably be the peak decline in gross margins. And then depending on what Tesla has to do with MSRPs going forward, their costs though should continue to improve quarter on quarter. So what I'm saying is if they can hold pricing relative in this area, you'll see their gross margins actually steadily improve with volume because of what I explained later.
Okay, let's get going. Tell me about what happened in COVID. I mean, this is important because it's the reason why prices skyrocketed, and then people are now upset with the price reductions. But tell us.
Yeah, why I think you'll like a couple of these later because I'm going to do more talking and less words on the slide. But in COVID economies, a couple of things were basically happening. Labor was scarce. Labor is scarce in some places still currently, and there are increases. It could be anywhere from 1.5 to 3x. If you're assembling something mechanically, the cost to convert that from raw material into a finished good from a supplier to Tesla is around 65 to 75% of that cost structure is actually wrapped up in labor. So from a scarcity perspective and running overtime because you're scarce on labor, some of those costs were definitely passed over to OEMs like Tesla. Inbound, outbound logistics, these curves are out there in terms of like freight, ocean freight, air freight, everything it was up anywhere between 10 and 20x. So, I mean, these could be thousands of dollars. So while Tesla was actually localizing their factories and opening up factories closer to where their consumers buy cars, they were also dealing with, these inbound and outbound logistics, freight hikes. So all those things happened actually at the same time. They weren't fully localized, and you had these inbound, outbound logistics issues. So logistics for Tesla are going to come down dramatically.
Yes.
They're going to come down dramatically. And it's going to continue. They're going to continue to come down as well. And then finally, the raw material scarcity. Tesla did a better job. So Tesla, number one, when you look at their bill of material and how their supply chain and engineering teams work together, they multi-source, I believe, a higher percentage of their body. They focus on. You heard them talk about multi-sourcing in investment days. That's where you have one part in the car. Let's say it's the door handle. Instead of just Tesla, depending on one supplier, they'll have two or they'll have three. Well, what that gives Tesla, it gives them two things. One is it gives them supply continuity insurance in case there's a flood, a fire, or they can't get labor at that one supplier. The other thing it gives them, it allows them to have those three suppliers compete. And in a three supplier relationship, what you would normally do is you'd give one supplier 40%, one 40, and then you'd make a challenger, you'd give them 10 or 20% of share. And then what you would do is you'd tell the challenger, say, look, if you can do XYZ on delivery or on inventory or on price, because remember, supplier contracts are more than just price. Inventory is a big deal. Indemnification is a big deal, which is like who owes what if a quality issue occurs. So what Tesla will do is they'll have a third source, and they'll drive that third source to become a second or third source. And what that will do is it'll put pressure on one and two to hold. So if you have that dynamic when you can have at least two sources, if not three, you get pricing power and you get supply continuity.
Okay, wonderful. So COVID really did a number, and so they needed to raise prices. Okay.
COVID did a significant number, many, many thousands of dollars per car at different points in time.
Huge.
There were flashpoints and issues. Yeah. There's still a trail of some issues, specifically on the labor front, but a lot of this is really coming through the system.
Okay. And then, so that's why they needed to raise prices. And so now when they're trying to bring back prices, people are upset going, what's happening to our gross margin? But it's actually both cost of goods went up, prices went up. And so both are actually falling. So we may not have to be as freaked out as we may be. Well,
yeah. And that was the point of the first slide in the deck, which is at the launch of the Model Y, where the gross margins are the worst, Tesla's MSRPs were actually flat on the Model Y compared to where they are today.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking forward to this. It's making me excited. Okay, so let's talk about recession, because now we're in a recession. COVID's done, but we're in a recession.
Yeah, so some people say that we've entered in. Some people say we may enter in. You actually don't physically know you've been through a recession until actually like a quarter or two later, where there's actually a governing body that goes and calculates that it's more than just negative quarters of GDP, because we had 2 quarters of negative GDP last year. But in a normal recession, this is really important.
Okay.
Commodities decline due to a lack of demand. That's what happens. Now, there's some schools of thought that say some things may increase, but in general, the commodities that are used to make a lot of things in autos decline. And I believe Elon's even spoke about this himself, that there is an interesting silver lining during a recession, which is commodity prices do come down. So, and I'll stitch all this together in a bit.
But it's not just commodities, right? Doesn't general supply, everything and all the supplies might go down too?
No, they won't go down, because they won't go down on their own. In fact, your supply chain costs, which are your supplier costs to put components together, and then your costs in your factories, if you don't manage your demand, and that's what I'll kind of get to in the point in a slide or two later. But if you can't maintain or grow your demand, those costs will actually swallow the commodity to cost declines, and your cost structure will crater during a recession. This is how companies go out of business. So that's why Tesla is trying to stay on that up curve on demand. And actually, they're also riding the EV. What they have, the wind at their back, is the EV adoption curve. So I'll get to that in a bit. I wanted to briefly show what happened to U.S. auto sales. So in U.S. auto sales, so end device decline, end device units, they decline. So depending where you pick the point, this is U.S. auto sales. I also graphed the Fed funds rate thanks to ChatGPT, and I did.
But you just told me You told me earlier Fed fund rate has no correlation.
Yeah, there really isn't a correlation. It just shows you that the Fed funds rate went way down. So in 2007, right before this recession, everything was great, selling 16 million cars in the U.S. And depending on what year you call the inflation shock, it went down 16%. The 13.2 in 2008, and then down to 36% in 2009. So that was the kind of the peak to trough on U.S. auto sales. And people say like nobody buys a car during a recession. The answer is no. It's somewhere between 16 and 30%, using a very deep prior recession that was banking related and real estate related.
The worst.
Yes. So if we go ahead to the next slide, and kind of stitch some of these points together in terms of like, okay, let's go about EV adoption. The first point to kind of stitch together. So EV adoption, this is an important point related to the recession. So EV adoption is growing roughly 50% in the US and about 100% in China year on year. What does that mean? It means around 5% of the cars that were purchased last year were EVs in the US. And so far, early this year, it's running at about 7.2%. So it's running about 50% in the US. So I talked about the 2009 recession, very deep recession, the 16 to 36% drawdown. EV as a percent of auto just has to grow greater than that predicted macro decline. It's again using that 16 to 36% to maintain demand. That's how the math works. That's why people just love it. That's why. Is that clear? I mean,
this explains it. Basically, when there's a macroeconomic recession, we know that car sales go down, but actually, it's not all car sales. It's the gas cars, because in the 2008 one, that's when hybrids took off. And this year, this is when EVs are going to take off. So even though there's a recession, car sales go down, but not EVs. And so that's why you're saying that the markets will stay.
When you're operating a secular grower like EVs inside of total EV, inside of total auto, when you have this special situation, you have an opportunity to actually maintain, if not even grow, your demand. And that's why Tesla got on that, for all the recession talk coming out of Tesla, they got on the Q1 earnings call and said, hey, guess what? Our low end's 1.8 and we're going, could be upwards of 2 million. And then GM got on their earnings call and said SAR, which is total auto sales, are going to grow 1 million units from 2022 to 2023. So anyway, some strange things, but the EV as a percent of total auto is the takeaway from that slide. If that grows faster than the decline in total auto, which it should, and there's no reason why. And what Tesla has done with pricing, whereas now an EV is actually as much or lower than a conventional ICE car, there's no reason why that wouldn't continue. So that was the key takeaway in that slide.
Let me pause you and ask you a question straight out. Did Tesla reduce the prices because they're softening demand, or did they reduce the prices because they want to, because they can, because costs fell down and they can maintain a high enough margin?
I mean, I think there's not. I think it's a bit of both. There's not one answer for all regions. There's some regions, there's some pockets where they could have great demand. There's some car segments where they could have great demand. There's some that could be softening. I don't think there's one answer. But what I did found interesting is when I was doing the research for this presentation, if you can go back to that Electrek article, but that was 2 quarters into the launch of the Model Y. Tesla
was Electrek article way back here
in the beginning of the presentation. Next, one more. There. Tesla dropped the price of the Model Y. Look at the date of the article. Basically, why would Tesla drop? This is early. This is when they're only building 15, 20, 30,000 Model Ys in a quarter. Now they're going to build 300K in a quarter. They've 10x'd. Why would they be changing their prices up and down? Tesla has the ability to look at price elasticity and demand and make those modifications. So like, I found it very interesting. Like 2 quarters into launch, you don't normally drop pricing unless that product is literally going to be a dud and kind of die off. When Tesla was trying to do is basically spur demand and drive growth. So I believe that's why they're doing that with the pricing.
You and I have been debating quite a bit. Our group, our Cyber Bulls, have been debating, and I've been saying what Amy has been saying. Amy is an airline pilot. She goes, Tesla is following variable pricing because they sell direct to consumer, just like when you want to buy a seat on an airline, they goes up and down by day. And that's what Tesla should do. And that's what they've been doing. Every 2 weeks, every month, they'll raise and price it. I think it's a great thing. Every time they do a change in price, it's mass media, legacy media talks about it, and everybody realizes cost. You'd say, no, I don't like it. I want them to make a price change and then don't change it for a long time. And yet you just said price variability.
Yeah, let me be clear. I'm not a huge fan of the frequency of change. I think that confuses consumers. And that could put this is all speculation, but that could, cause consumers to kind of be in this wait and see mode. Like it'd be, Tesla could have this high frequency of pricing changes as long as someone like Elon comes out and says, look, this isn't going to last forever. Like he actually said that in Q1 for a bit.
They will automatically just raise another $2,000, $5,000. And then people are going to go, oh, they're raising again. They're just going to keep raising, lowering.
Right. So there are people inside of Tesla that are paid to know COGS by quarter and be able to predict COGS by quarter. I would prefer and there are people that are paid to actually predict demand by price tier. There are people that are paid to do that. I would prefer if they group some of these changes together, but I am a fan of the price changes. Okay. I just wish they would group them a little bit more in lower frequency. The other thing is the optics is Tesla goes direct to consumer. So you see every Tesla price change, whereas and
I think it's actually
good.
I think it's actually good. My own family now knows that they actually think of Tesla's cheap now because they keep hearing, oh, they cut prices globally. It's great. It's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
It's what's going to change this in perception that Tesla's, I was hearing somebody, an Uber driver was going, that, he was going, oh, Teslas are expensive, $100,000. And like, no. So people still have that impression. Okay.
Right. Okay. Just a couple more and we'll wrap up. So this EV adoption point is important. As long as that EV adoption rate is greater than the decline in total auto, they can maintain or grow demand.
Okay. Yeah, you said.
We go to the next view. So this is what I think the playbook is. One, leverage the commodity decline, lithium carbonate, copper, aluminum, so forth. 2, leverage the COGS learning from Model 3, extrapolate it to other products like Model Y, so forth.
Model Y.
And then 3, drive demand higher through price elasticity driven MSRP changes. Do those 3 things. If you can keep your demand up, you keep your utilization up in your factories and at your suppliers. So you sum it up. If Tesla can maintain and grow their demand at their factories and suppliers, they keep their utilization rates high. That's really important. They leverage the COGS framework from Model 3, and they leverage that lower commodity pricing. That playbook will allow them, I believe, to thrive during this period. Think of legacy OEM right now. You hear them shutting down factories for quote unquote inventory, or shutting down factories for quote unquote a supply issue. You know what a lot of those supply issues is if suppliers are uncertain of your demand, they may themselves shut down or slow down because they're not certain that you're going to take everything that they're building, and then they get stuck with that inventory. So not to speculate, but this is what happens a lot. So when you hear about there's a supply issue, and by the way, still 3 years after COVID, if you're hearing about persistent supply issues, there's actually something deeper going on, I believe, from a demand perspective with that OEM partner.
All right, so let's wrap it up and let's tell me all the cost advantages. Here we go. This is it.
Yeah, and we can take some more. We take some more questions after this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to add to this list. It can go on, but I want to explain some of these things. Um,
Okay.
what are the advantages? Number one, the person at the top of Tesla gets it. He's made it the culture, and he's aligned the mission to it. I can tell you that I haven't seen another company that has done it this way and this succinctly as Tesla in terms of making it the culture, and having it be in every single. I've not seen this in all of my in my entire career.
Yep.
You hear about vertical integration. You hear about it in the factories, like Tesla builds a lot of parts of their own parts in the factories, but they're actually also, which is really important in cost structure, because if you're building those components, you're not paying the supplier a margin on top of their labor for their labor, because you have John and Jane in your factory building that part. You pay John and Jane the labor rate to build that part. Now, if you go to a supplier in another supplier in Texas to go get that part, there's a John and Jane working in that factory, but that supplier is not going to charge you the base labor rate. They're going to charge
Yep.
you, an adder on top of that. So the
Okay.
more parts that they build in their four walls, the better it is for their cost structure. And then their
Mhm.
OpEx. So their engineers, um, they do more of the car design, all the car design inside of Tesla. They do not outsource it. So when you outsource the car design, you outsource the infotainment system, you outsource the steering wheel assembly, you do this, you have to pay a margin on top of that. And then you have to pay them a margin on assembly. So when it's not only a factory thing, it's actually how they're organized inside of Tesla's four walls, their engineering. And then when you have a supply shock like we had with silicon, Tesla has all of those engineers in their four walls to react to those changes, versus other OEMs. They've got to go call the infotainment supplier. They've got to go call this supplier. Or Tesla has direct relationships with the silicon suppliers. So I can't overemphasize how they're actually organized is the reason why they're able to get the cost structure they get.
Mhm.
The other thing to their org is the functional teams. When you hear about functions, you immediately think engineering, supply chain. I'm actually talking about car functions. Like so they are organized. They do have a supply chain team. They do have a factory team. They are organized that way, but they also organize by there's a team of supply chain, supplier quality people, engineers, software people that work on the motor. And they're focused on getting to that $1,000 price target for the next gen vehicle. They're functionally organized per car function. And that's very different, both in any industry I've seen. And that came out during the investor day for
Mhm.
me. And they're all kind of in one goal. The quarter on quarter growth and predictability are huge. I can't overemphasize that. They're not pushing material out. When they ask suppliers for product, they end up asking the same or more. They don't push material out. During COVID, the first thing that happened in March, remember March of 2020 when the stock market cratered, all the auto OEMs called their suppliers and told them to stop or slow down.
Mhm.
And that's one of the reasons why there was this huge supply shock, both in computers and auto, is they thought that there would be this massive demand drop off. So they called their suppliers and said, just shut it off. Tesla was not doing that. Tesla was saying, give me more. The minimal SKUs, which means when Tesla puts a forecast out to suppliers, they're not forecasting across 40 different things, hoping to get 70% forecast accuracy across 40 SKUs. They're forecasting across 4 base SKUs basically, and that allows them to be more accurate in terms of what they ask suppliers for. I can't tell you what that means in terms of like suppliers knowing what they're supposed to build and when to build it. In terms of the SKU minimization, the simplicity, the best process and no process, we've heard a lot of that before. I talked about localization. The rate of engineering and supplier changes is critical. They don't wait quarterly to put these in. They put them in when they're ready. The inventory velocity is huge. In this last quarter, they only had about 3.5 days of DOI. I know people looked at it
Yeah.
annualized, and it's
Industry
around
leading.
16. It's
Yep.
industry leading. That's a huge deal in terms of their cost structure. That means when they have those engineering changes come in, there's not 6 months or a year of inventory they've got to work through before the change goes out to the consumer. That's a big deal. The velocity in terms of the rate of which cars come out and they continue to work on that rate. The DFM work they do the DFM work before they release the design for suppliers. That's a very important thing. Everybody thinks everybody does DFM before they release to suppliers, but I think they get to their end DFM goals on that kind of that first set of parts. And then we've talked about and debated this a lot, the no ad spend. So there's just, I could keep adding to this list over and over in terms of their advantages, but this is what is separating them from other OEMs.
How does this list compare to the 7 that we saw earlier that showed that they already reduced the cost of goods down by 30% for the Model 3? Are you saying that this is potentially even more reduction, continued reduction because of these things?
Yeah.
How does it compare? Yeah.
There's some things that are similar, like the scale, like number 4, the quarter-on-quarter growth. They had a scale, they had a localization piece, but like they didn't want to they kind of did talk about their organization during the the investor day, but the 1, 2, and 3 are really how they're organized as a company. They're organized to deliver the lowest cost structure, and I can't tell you, you can't just go into a GM or a Stellantis and be, I'm not saying they're incapable, but they're not organized the way that Tesla is organized. And those first 3 points are hard to do. You'd actually have to go restructure the entire company to get to something like that. It may take years to do.
That's always one question here from Paulo. Jeff, do you think Tesla has modeled an optimal auto GM percentage, say 23%, that allows appropriate free cash flow for growth and will utilize price as a tool to drive absorption demand, right? So,
yeah. I don't think there's going to be one fixed point. I believe that they're going to eventually drive gross margins into the mid to upper 30% range. I believe it's possible. What they're doing with part reduction. What they're doing with part reduction and what they're doing with software. Remember, don't forget FSD. Don't forget all the other software as a service things that Tesla will be able to provide. I believe that they'll be able to get into the upper 30s, if not 40%.
That would be later. Over time. What are you expecting right now, this quarter? I know people are thinking that they're going to sacrifice margins this year, this quarter, and that all the good stuff will happen later.
Yeah, like I said, I believe in this quarter, this will be the low point. I believe it'll be right around that 20, somewhere between 20 and 21 points of gross margin. But then they'll continue to take their cost structure down pretty precipitously. And then as they grow volume, remember, they left 2022 at a 40K per week run rate, and they've already added 10% of that to the first quarter. So they're going to continue to grow their volume output. That's what's confusing people. Why, if there's concerns about demand, why is Tesla continuing to add to their capacity? Because they see those volume elasticity curves. They know where that demand is. What is difficult to predict right now is just kind of what's going on economically with consumers. That could be a little bit difficult to predict, and that's why they may be doing multiple price changes in succession.
Okay, so let me wrap it up. The summary of what I think I heard you teach me today, which is very, very cool. So first of all, since 2019, this is pre-COVID, the prices of the Model 3 and the Model Y is pretty well the same as it is now, where it is today. But of course, COVID caused tremendous impact to every company. Tesla was able to manage it better, but that's why they had to raise their prices over the next several years. Now, this year, we have a complicated factor because it's a macro recession. But in fact, that's actually a benefit for Tesla because we think that demand, typically, as you shared, is going to probably stay flat for EV sales, specifically Tesla sales. And they are changing prices to try to get a little bit more of the demand, but that's not the real driver. It's not like not because of the recession, there's a massive drop in demand and Tesla's in trouble. And in fact, because of the recession, they're able to save more money on potentially cost of goods and supplies and commodities. So you're thinking the margin may actually stay at 20-21% this year, this quarter. And in the following quarters, it's going to be just up. You said up to even 30%, you think that at some point. So,
well, over time. Yeah, over time. So I think it'll steadily improve quarter on quarter. Again, unless there's some other shock that's occurring in the economy. Again, we have this unique point of EV adoption as a percent of total auto. As long as EV adoption stays ahead of the
Yeah.
macro auto decline, Tesla and other companies don't have EV capacity. If they did, they would also be in a similar position as Tesla, but they don't have the EV capacity and they don't have the gross margins. Tesla has both of those, so they can actually capitalize on the commodity declines during a recessionary period.
Right.
That's a
Okay.
lot. It's a
Wow.
lot. It's a lot to kind of take in at one point.
Yeah.
But I thought it was important to kind of go through it.
Yeah, I love that you pointed out again that we forgot, many of us have forgotten that they showed this line, which is, 2018 to 2022, they've reduced the cost of goods for the Model 3 at 30%. And you're saying that you think that Model Y, it won't be as high as 30%, but it could be, mid 20s or something like that. And so that,
Yeah,
because
I
the
mean,
most important thing is
it'll grow to
Model
that.
Y. Okay, but I guess the most important thing for this quarter and next quarter is the Model Y. If the cost of
Mm-hmm.
goods was able to be reduced in order to match the sales reduction in price, and because the Model Y, it's the number, it's basically the Model 3 maybe impacted a little bit, but it's not really the key thing, right? So
Model
we got to
Y is
see
in
what
the
happens with
middle
that.
of it's in the middle of that Model 3 journey that they showed. And that journey will continue. I've seen products, just so you know, I've seen products that have a 50% decline in COGS, 60, 70% over their lifetime. And you would have never imagined at the launch of that product that you'd be able to do that. But a lot of it has to do with the length in service and the scale. So what Tesla's able to do with their cars is they're able to keep them in service for a very long time and continue selling that same model. And while they're growing volume, again, in that EV ramp, very unique. So you're in a growing secular industry, and you've got cars that people want to buy for 4, 5, 6 years or longer, and where you can just continue to drive that cost structure down internal to your company. So it's a very, very special situation right now for EVs. Again, there's some comparisons to smartphones as well I can go through, but maybe at a different time. But very, very special point right now for EVs and what they're able to do in this
Okay,
time frame.
what's your reaction to when you saw Elon say, talking about affordability? That's why we're doing reducing pricing. He's talked about this quite a bit, which is if at a certain price point, there's only a certain amount of addressable market for that price point because it's expensive. And their goal is to reduce the prices so that it's much more affordable and more people. And if because they can reduce their cost of goods, they can maintain a good margin. But a lot of the Tesla investors are concerned that, that means that he's sacrificing margins, doesn't care about the stock price. He just cares about selling as much as he can. What's your interpretation of when he made that comment just a few days ago?
Yeah, no, I think he's looking at price elasticity curves and what people are willing to buy at certain price points. And he knows that there's a maximum of where he's going to be able to get the current portfolio of vehicles to. And he knows he's going to be able to pick that work up when we get to the next generation, Gen 3 vehicles, plural. So I believe he knows that he's got a longer distance. Remember, Model Y is still in the middle of that journey, probably of 30%. And quite frankly, Model 3 could keep going. And what they're doing, we don't know what they're doing with this Model 3 redesign. And they could be removing several parts, and you can be getting some nonlinear style reductions, not the 1 to 2% per quarter. You could be getting more on this Model Y relaunch. So we'll have to see. Yeah, Model 3 relaunch. So we'll have to see. And then Model Y is just in the middle part of that journey. So he knows he's got more room to go. We don't even know the COGS yet. We're not at peak COGS. When I say peak, the minimal COGS yet on the new Model Y out of Austin, because Austin's are only running at about half its phase 1 capacity. That one's going to continue coming down as well, especially as the 4680 ramps up. So he knows he's got a long runway on the Model Y. So that's why he can say the point is to continue to drive affordability, because he knows he's going to continue to take the cost of the car down several $1,000s.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I mean, you taught me a lot, and I tell you, I still trust Tesla management more than I do some of the talking heads like us, because we don't have visibility. They have visibility, and all this debate about advertising and why are they reducing prices and oh my God, the world must be falling. I just don't buy that. We'll see in a couple of days. Thank you, Jeff. Please follow Jeff on Twitter at the Jeff Lutz. He's the Jeff Lutz. Twitter, follow him. We're gonna get him raise his Twitter following because he's just a brilliant guy. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. I am going to continue doing these live shows. By the way, I've just been so wishy-washy. I've been trying to evaluate all different options, but for now, I'm going to continue to Tesla Today's. We're going to continue to Cyber Bulls. So appreciate everybody here to join and to continue supporting me. Please give me a like and a subscribe, and hopefully I'll grow these Tesla Today's even higher than it is now. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.